Before you start planning your career for next year, there is something that you need to know. And that is that your brain has already decided what you're allowed to want, not what is actually possible for you. So today we're going to be looking at the deeper truth behind your career goals and why if you don't do this step first, then what you end up putting down on your career goals may end up be planning a future that is smaller than what you're actually capable of. Hey, I'm Kiran Yoliswa, and welcome back to the Possibility Pattern podcast, where we combine neuroscience and career strategy to help you navigate the future of your work and expand what's possible for you next. Let's get into it. Before we get into the episode, if you are ending this year feeling like you just cannot do another year like you just had in your career, and you feel like something has to change next year, but you're not completely sure what exactly that's going to be or even where to start, then it is time to stop waiting for clarity and to start creating some possibility for yourself. And I've created something for you to do just that. I'm launching Repattern, my 6-month career lab, which is designed to help you explore, decide, and build what's next without the spiral, without blowing up your life, or without starting over from scratch. We're going to get started on January 9th, and we'll be spending a lot of time together. So I want to keep things really intimate with a limited number at just 10 seats. So if you want to get to summer feeling like you finally have a clear sense of direction, you've made some decisions about what it is that you're going to do next, and you've already started building momentum towards it, then make sure that you grab one of those spots. The link is in the show notes, and I can't wait to see you in there. Every year around this time, people sit down to think about what it is that they want out of their career for the year ahead. Maybe that's a new promotion, more impact, more visibility, building a personal brand, moving to a completely different role. Whatever it is, we think that we're doing it in a way that is very logical or strategic or objective. We sort of think about what's happening in the market. We think about our skills, our competencies. We think about the opportunities that we think are available to us. But we think that we're making these decisions both with a very clear mind and a very sound mind, and also that we're in full conscious control of the decisions and the goals that we're sort of thinking about and putting down on our list. But the reality is that we're not. By the time you've even sat yourself down to start writing your goals, your brain has already done some of the pre-work for you. It has already decided ahead of time what it's even going to allow you to come to mind, to consider, to put down on your goal list for the year. So when you're thinking about your goals, you think it's blank canvas. You think that you're really thinking about all of the options that are available to you, when the reality is that your brain is showing you an edit from which you can then choose from. So even though you think you're choosing freely, you're actually choosing from a very narrow set of possibilities. And that's because your brain isn't a neutral observer. It has a point of view, it has a perspective of what it believes is possible for you and what it believes a person like you should or shouldn't do. And it makes that list based on that perspective. And that's why if you just jump straight into planning without having done some of this work that we're going to be talking about today, then the ideas that come to mind for you aren't necessarily going to be the most expansive or even the best options for you. They're simply going to be the ones that your brain is currently allowing you to consider. So before we talk about how to actually get your brain to give us a wider range of options, let's talk about why it does that in the first place, because we're going to be using the same trick in reverse. So the reason why this happens is because our brain is ultimately a prediction machine. So at any given moment, no matter what you're doing or where you are, your brain is always using information that is stored in your memory about your past, what you've done, where you've been, what you've seen, everything that's in your past to predict what's going to happen next. And this is important because we don't think about it that way. We usually think, as we're sort of moving through the world, that we are interpreting the world around us. So we think that we are seeing the world around us and then we are responding. So for example, maybe the temperature gets a little bit chilly and I sense that, and so I go and put on a jumper. So we think that we're choosing in response to what's happening around us, when actually what's happening is that our brain is always guessing ahead of time what it thinks is going to happen next, and we make our decisions from that perspective. And this is true all the way down from like micro decisions like what am I going to eat next, all the way up to what we're talking about today in terms of what career move am I going to make, or how do I want to grow my career this year. So it's constantly trying to keep us one step ahead of uncertainty. And so even though we think that we are reacting to everything around us, our brain is actually being a lot more proactive than we think. So even before you've asked yourself a question like, what do I want for my career this year? Your brain has already formed an opinion about what it thinks is probable for you. And that prediction sits underneath everything and becomes the foundation of every idea that even comes to mind when you think about your career and how you want it to expand and grow moving forwards. And that's because our brains are so much less interested in the question of what could I do next year? How could my career grow next year? And way more focused on the question of what fits the pattern of who I've been so far. And at the heart of all of these predictions is something that I think most people don't realize. And that is how you see yourself. How you see yourself and our identity is not just a part of the prediction model, it is the prediction model. Our brains forecast into the future based on who we believe ourselves to be. And that is why our identity and the way that we see ourselves, I believe, is the true gatekeeper of our career growth. And this is so crucial because it shapes our careers in such tangible ways. So, for example, big one, identity determines what your brain counts as possible for you. And that's why the way that you see yourself, your self-concept, acts as a sort of boundary around your imagination. Because any goal that doesn't fit the way that you currently see yourself, your brain isn't going to recognize as you. And so it's not going to feel believable or available to you. And therefore, often won't even occur to you in the first place because your brain literally filters it out. It doesn't recognize it as you. It doesn't fit the prediction model of who you are. And so you don't even see it. And that's why so often I'll hear from people things like, someone suggested a role to them and they'll say, I never even considered doing something like that. Yeah, it never even occurred to you because it doesn't fit the model of how you see yourself. So even if you saw it, you just brush past it without even really paying attention to it because it didn't fit. And this is crucial because often the way we see ourselves is different from the way that other people see us, which is why they see things and recognize them as us and send it to us. But we don't even see those opportunities and see it as being possible because of the way that we currently see ourselves. On the flip side, what we do instead is we are more likely to naturally consider roles that we're doing right now or things that we've done before, opportunities or paths that you've seen people like you take in whatever way like you reflects your sense of identity. I don't mean specific things like race or gender or anything like that. I mean in whichever ways your identity feels most strongly tied to, and you're going to feel more naturally pulled towards things that reinforce who you've been so far. So your sense of identity can not only block bigger goals for you, it can also keep pulling you back to familiar ones. A great example of this is I had a coaching client who was a lawyer who was trying to move out of law and into a different field. And she would often confess in her sessions that she'd applied for another law role. Even though she knew that she wanted to move out of it, she was completely clear and adamant that she wanted to move out of it. But she just kept finding herself applying for those roles and taking those interviews. And she described it as, it just feels like a loop that I just can't break. And it's literally that. Her identity around being a lawyer felt so strong and compelling that she just kept on being drawn back to those type of roles, even though she knew she was ready to leave that identity behind. That story is also a great example of this next point, which is that how we see ourselves and our identity also shapes what feels emotionally safe for us to want. And that's because our nervous system treats unfamiliar futures as uncertainty, and that feels very threatening to us and feels very threatening to our nervous system. And so those familiar things feel safer to our nervous system. And when you're in that transition of trying to leave something behind and move towards something new, that old thing that you're leaving behind can still feel safe because it's familiar and comforting. And that's also why that client who was a lawyer kept on going back to applying for law roles or doing the law interviews, because that felt emotionally safer than considering the uncertainty of what she wanted to do next. And this is not necessarily about the goal of what you're trying to move towards being too big. It's just that the identity shift it requires feels so destabilizing to us and our nervous systems. And this is why sometimes exciting goals that you may have for your career also feel really daunting and feel really threatening. And the goals that feel too big, we can sometimes feel like, I'm not ready for that yet. And often when we don't feel ready for a goal or it feels too big, what we're really saying or what we're really feeling is that I don't see myself in that way yet. Whereas some goals that are misaligned for you, like getting a job in a field that you know that you hate, can feel comforting. In other words, your emotional response to a potential goal is often an identity response, not a capability response. Another way that how we see ourselves or our identity acts as the gatekeeper of our careers is because our identity is what predicts our behavior and our ambition. You may have heard this often. People talk about habits and they say that your habits actually follow your identity, and that one of the best ways to change a habit is to actually change your identity first, because our brain uses our identity to forecast what somebody like us does, how somebody like us behaves. And this informs how ambitious our brain allows us to be, what risks we take, what roles we step into, how visible we're willing to be. And so we gravitate towards goals that match these predictions, not necessarily the ones that match our potential. So it limits our behavior by limiting the kind of goals that we even go for in the first place. And finally, the last one that I want to talk about is that how we see ourselves and our identity is tied to our social world and our sense of belonging. And so the goals that your brain comes up with are going to be ones that protect that sense of social belonging. And that's because our goals aren't just personal decisions, they're social, they're relational. And how we see ourselves is co-created through our relationships, how other people see us, the way that we grew up, the expectations that people have of us, what people rely on us for, how people know us to be, and the role that you play in your team or in your family. So we subconsciously steer away from goals that might disrupt that sense of belonging. And because part of the predictions that your brain is making are social predictions. So it's going to try and protect and reinforce your place in your social world. So the big picture insight here is that how you see yourself or your identity doesn't just limit your goals, it curates them. And that's why I think about it as being the real gatekeeper of your career goals, or how you think about your career, because it filters out futures and opportunities that don't fit who you currently believe yourself to be. But it elevates and shows you more futures and opportunities and goals that maintain who you currently are and maintain predictability and belonging and your status quo, essentially, and pulling you toward paths that reinforce the story that you've lived so far. And that's all well and good. It's doing that to protect you. So it's not to say that this is a bad thing, but the reason why it's something you have to keep an eye on is because when you're thinking about career growth or, career expansion or what it is that you really want in your career, you have to be mindful of the fact that this is a hidden pattern that is happening in the background, which means that your ambition and your imagination about what you can do and be in the future is being determined by how you currently see yourself. And that's why your goals don't really start with ambition, they start with your identity. And that's why doing this kind of identity work before doing your goal setting is no longer a nice to have and is more of a requirement, because this really is the architecture of how your brain is going to decide what it is that you're going to do next. And at the same time, the reality is the way that the world of work is rapidly changing underneath us means that for all of us, our identities and our status quo and the way we've been thinking about our career goals in our careers so far is outdated, and that actually we're all going to be needing to think about how we reinvent and how we adapt, and what does our ambition and our goals look like in the context of that change. So I think this is all especially relevant for us right now. So as you're thinking about your goals for your career for the year ahead, here's what I would invite you to pay attention to before you start putting pen to paper. And that is how much of how you see yourself right now is defined by your career as it exists today. So that's your job title, the company that you work for, the industry that you're in, the way that you're known to work. Because a lot of the early signal and what's being predicted about the future of work is that those things are going to matter a lot less than they do now. Traditional career paths are falling, the ladder's falling down, titles are going to be a lot looser, job descriptions are going to be a lot less fixed and a lot more agile, roles are going to be more fluid, careers in general are going to be more non-linear and a lot more modular. And in the context of all of that change, it's impossible to really have a perfect plan. No one can really predict exactly how things are going to settle. But what is going to make you more adaptable to those changes is not being over-identified with a single version of you or with a version of you that is outdated. And as we've talked about, when your identity is tightly attached to a specific role or a specific company or even a specific industry, that means that your brain is predicting your future based on those very narrow boundaries. And when you loosen that a bit and expand that, it also expands what is available and possible for you. Because your thinking opens up, your options expand, the things you notice and start paying attention to widen. When you start to see yourself in new, wider ways, then new possibilities start to feel a lot more imaginable. So before you set your goals for the year, just notice, where am I letting my current career define who I believe that I am? And where might that be limiting how I imagine my future? That's what we're noodling on this week. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I'm so curious to hear what comes up for you, so do reach out on socials and let me know. And as always, thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye.